Okay, let us start looking one by one. So first, since this is the zone which is much more accessible to us, and this is a zone which when we are going to the beach, we are often coming across intertidal zone. As I said that it is, again, it's a rich and diverse zone. We will see in couple of slides later that what all life forms exist there. However, we know that due to the upwelling current that brings the nutrient-rich water to the surface, that affects the intertidal zone. There are several mobile species. For example, if you go to the beach, you can see that a lot of crabs ghost crabs will be moving or there. There will be limpets, gastropods, sea stars. So this is a very general slide which includes the intertidal zone not only of the sandy but also for the muddy and for the rocky beaches. So you can see crabs, limpets, gastropods, sea stars, and mostly hide under the crevices and attach to the rocks to escape from the predators. So we will see that what all the adaptations they have come across. Then there is a second organism called a sessile organism. So what you need to understand, it's a kind of concept. Keep in mind that this species can be of two types. One is fixed species, that also we can call it as sessile animals, not species, animals. So sessile animals which does not move much. Okay, it's not that they can't move. For example, barnacle, mussels, oysters, they can move, but it's mostly they will be fixed in one particular locations. So these are sessile animals. If you go for the sessile plants, then seaweeds are the sessile plants you can take as an example. And then you have the mobile species, for example, which can have the mobility, for example, crabs, limpets, gastropods, sea stars, and so on, right? In the intertidal zone, you can see in the plants mostly seaweeds, and of course there are benthic diatoms and phytoplanktons, which we will be seeing now. Okay, so only those species which can tolerate the abiotic or the biotic factors or the stresses available on the intertidal zone will be available in this particular area. Let us see one by one. Now assume that you are going to a sandy beach. What will you see? I know that many of you have a background of marine biology or have visited already into the sea, so that maybe looks very simple to you. But then there are several people who have not went to the beaches or to the coastal areas. It is mostly for them that when you go to the beach, you will see or you will mostly observe, or in a first glance you can say or you can assume that sandy shores are devoid of wildlife, because it doesn't look like that there are many species living or many diversity living on the sandy shores. If you look little carefully, you will observe a number of macrofaunas on the surface of the sands, right? And that includes your insects or the striders. Then you will also see some amphipods, crabs, mussels, and then of course you have the coastal vegetations, different salt marsh plants or the plants which are adapted to the sandy areas. Apart from that, you will also see a number of seabirds on the sea coast feeding on the coastal or the benthic animals at the coast, right? So this is all the megafauna. You will be not mega, you can say it's a macrofauna. You can be able to see if you look carefully into the sandy shore. However, is it only limited to these macrofaunas? No, it is not. If you further look into detail or if you observe very closely, with the very closely, what I mean is sometimes you also need microscope and then sands, you will observe a very diverse meiofauna life forms. So as you can see in the image, there is one study which was published in 2012 from the Chennai coast. That we have Marina Beach, which is a kind of very large beach and second largest sandy beach, one patch in the urban setup, right? So you can see that different stations have been sampled, right? Trivittur, Marina, Besan Nagar, Nilankarai, it's all in the same uh, uh, location within 15 kilometers. You can see that in 10 centimeter square, you have 1,50,000 individuals. I mean, I'm saying about the maximum in the graph, but then you can see that it is not that the sandy beaches are devoid of life forms. There are life forms. You can see macrofaunas because that is mostly visible, for example, crabs and some polychaetes and so on. But then if you look in detail about the meiofauna, you will see 1,50,000 individual per 10 centimeters square. That's a huge, if you just see, if you just imagine that how much area this sandy beaches covers, right? Again, the diversity varies across the different months. So you can say that there is a temporal and also a spatial. So two terms are coming. One is temporal variation. So temporal variation, it means that the same location you study for longer duration of time, maybe for 1 year, for 2 year, every month or every week, right? Whereas the spatial, it means that different locations at the same time you study. For example, here you can see that Nilankarai, Besan Nagar, Marina, all these locations, all these stations are studied in a spatial manner. Okay. So I hope that I am clear now that the sandy beaches are is not true that it is devoid of wildlife. There are meiofaunal diversity in much more abundance. And what these meiofauna are? So see that there are foraminiferas, polychaetes, nematodes, rotifers, gastrotrichs, isopods, ostropods, copypods, and several other meiofaunal diversity. In one particular slide, I am showing you here, you see this is a pictorial slide, again taken from some literature in the internet. You can see that there are nematodes and which looks slightly red in color. So when you collect the sandy beach, sand from the sandy beach, and when you stain it with let's say rose Bengal or some other stain, then you can see these organisms in abundant quantity. Also, you can see that there are foraminiferas, stained foraminiferas in here, right? So as I said, that there are diverse meiofaunal life forms. Now, when I said meiofaunal, many of you would be eager to know what this meiofauna terms means. So it is essential at this particular time that I make few definitions clear. First is epifauna. It means that animals dwelling on the surface of sediments. So you can understand that all those animals which you are seeing in the sandy shore, or let's say epifauna is a common term, so you can also see the oysters on the rocks, right? So all those animals which are dwelling on the surface of sediment is called as epifauna, right? Then we have infauna. It means all the animals that are dwelling below the surface of sediments, right? So those are called as infauna. And why there are infaunas? Mostly, if you talk in terms of the sandy beaches, most of the time what will happen that there, if in the low tide time, in order to keep themselves moist, they will be inside the sediments. So in the image you can see all the things which are there on the top. So this is the surface which you can see. You can see that there are oyster spats. Then you can see that there are some worms, sea squirts, oysters, right? So all these things are epifauna because it is on the top of the sediment or any surface. Whereas some you can see that it is inside the sediment, and that is called as infauna. And some of the examples of infauna can be any worm, clams. You can see the clams here, right? So all these are infauna. Now I hope that you are clear with what epifauna is and what infauna is. Further, the animals or the fauna can be further divided depending on the size. So you can have microfauna, which are the organisms greater than 0.1 mm in size, right? Then you have meiofauna between 0.06 and 0.05, I mean, sorry, 0.5. And then you have macrofauna, which is greater than 1 mm. So all those crabs which you are seeing on the sandy shore comes under the macrofauna because they are bigger than 1 mm. Lesser than 1 mm size of animal, you need to sieve it with the I mean, you need to filter it with the sieves in order to look under the microscope and find out the diversity, right? So this is what this epifauna, infauna, microfauna, meiofauna, and macrofauna means. Okay. Now, I said a lot about the animals on the sandy shores. For example, you can have the macrofauna, mostly mollusks, crustaceans, polychaetes, and not only that, even the coastal birds, seabirds, and coastal vegetations, right? And then I said that there are meiofauna as well, that includes foraminiferas, polychaetes, nematodes, rotifers, and a number of other meiofaunal life forms. So the question is, what determines the biodiversity in the sandy shore? So whether the meiofauna or the macrofauna on the sandy shore can be present across the world in the same distribution pattern, or whether the richness or whether the species richness and species diversity will vary, right? Of course, it varies. There are a number of papers which I have, with some of the papers I have just marked here, which has studied the influence of environmental factors and the biogenic habits on the intertidal meiofauna. Some of the very good books are there, like Ecology of Sandy Shores, and then you have a very recent study on the sandy beach macrofauna global diversity pattern. uh, all these things, I will not go in detail what those papers are, but in a nutshell what it says, that the diversity and the distribution of the species on the sandy shore depends on several factors. For example, on the sand grain size, sand grain types, okay, on the tidal range, on the temperature, on the vertical zonation, on the horizontal zonation, and then there are biotic factors, for example niche partitioning, mostly because of the because on the basis of food availability, feeding activities, okay, then on the reproductive ability, on the dispersal, aggregation, and so on, and also on the prey predator relationships, right? So what we understood is that the meiofauna or the macrofauna on the sandy shore are depending on various biotic and abiotic factors. In the figure, you can see a very coarse, or I mean a boulder or gravel size of the grain size. Then you can see a normal sand with the coarse nature. Then you can see a very fine silt or fine silt sands. Why do you think that this sand grain size affects the biodiversity? One particular example or one particular explanation is that depending on the type and the grain size of these different categories of the sands will make the interstitial spaces, right? And now depending on that, you will have different sizes or different uh, types of the meiofaunal diversity. Okay, that's clear now. Further, as I said here, that not only the sand size, I am not going in tidal range temperature because it's already well covered in the first 2 days. I will just show here that depending on the zonation of the sandy shore. Also, if you remember well, 2 3 slides back, I said that there is a vertical zonation where you have low tide area, where you have mid tide area, and where you have high tide area. So again, depending on that, the fauna will vary. So it varies in the littoral, and then this transitional and different areas in the sandy source. Okay. For example, here you can see that sea cucumber, blue crab, sand dollars mostly present into the subtidal. That also is a part of sublittoral zone. If you go above low tide zone, you can see that there are snails, there are mole crabs. It's not visible here, but then there are mole crabs. Then you have the clams. Then you have the lugworms, bristol worms, different kind of worms. And above high tide area, you have the coastal birds, but that's not limited. That can be even here. Then you have ghost crabs, amphipods, isopods, polychaetes, nematodes, and blah 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 blah, and a lot of different organisms, right? So one question comes is that what are the major challenges for these marine organisms to live in the sandy shore? So there are two major challenges. First is that in the low tide time, there will be a long period of exposure to the air. So they need to adapt to that particular condition. And that also, due to the movement of the sands because of the waves, uh, those who have went to the coast may have observed that when you are standing in a place, and if the wave is coming, what is happening, a lot of sand will move where you are standing. So it is possible, or otherwise there are a lot of sands which will come and deposit on your leg. So either your leg will be what will go down into the sand, or otherwise a lot of sand will move away from your leg. In both the cases, since you are going there just for fun or recreational activity, but just imagine these organisms have to deal with that kind of wave action constantly. So what do they need? They need to develop some kind of, or they need to develop some kind of mechanism which provides adaptations in the sandy soil. One way is to burrow deep. Okay, I will show you how the burrowing happens in the next slide. Burrow quickly, because if the waves are continuous and the passing waves are there, then before it moves the sand again, you have to burrow there. So burrow deep and burrow quickly. Many of the annelid worms and a number of clams are doing it. You can see some of the examples, some of the photos I have put here of the clams. So these clams are there on the surface of the sand, but it is having the capability, and it will go like this. See, I will show you where it is. It will go something like this. Okay, I hope it's clear. Then there are shells. So what this cells does, this cells helps them to retain the waters. Again, example of clam. So in the low tide time, most of the time they completely close the walls of the cell, so in order to retain the waters. Many organisms have adapted to the instability due to the wave, or due to the wave motion, in a way that they become thin, and then there are numerous feet. So with the numerous feet, they can dug easily, and then they can go inside quickly. For example, in case of polychaete, you can see one image of polychaete I have put here. So that's easy to imagine if you see the photo. Okay. And then you have the short bodies and powerful scoop-like modified hinged leg in the mole crab, particularly to dig. For example, you can see here this particular mole crab have a modified hind legs, so that acts as a scoop. Now, with the help of scoop, quickly it can burrow and it can go deep. So this is again an example of the adaptation in the sandy shore. Now, as I said that I will be telling about the burrowing. So burrowing is a kind of construction to construct by tunneling or digging. It happens mostly in polychaetes. Now you see one of the example of the clam here in the image. Where is my cursor? Okay, here. So before the wave comes in, okay, the snail tries to bury in, right? And then with the emergence of the wave, it already is inside, and then in the surf zone, right? So what happens that once the wave is coming, before that the clams tries to go in. If with the waves again the sand is moved, it will try to further rebury, right? So this kind of mechanism is constant, and again we will try to show this in the Mandapam coast, because there we have a lot of Donax species of these clams, which will keep on coming and going in the intertidal sandy area, right? And of course, then there are mobile animals which can walk or which can move very quickly with the passing waves. For example, you can see one camouflaged crustacean, that is a crab over here. If you can see closely to my screen, then you can see that there is a crab which moves very fast and crosses before the second waves comes in. Yeah. So these are some of the modifications in the sandy shore. So as a source of food, we have phytoplanktons. I will tell what phytoplankton is in a great detail in the coming weeks. Then we have, for now, you just understand that these are the autotrophs, microscopic autotrophs in the sand or in the water column, or in the sediment or in the water column. So that can be either benthic or pelagic. Now, when I say pelagic or benthic, I hope that most of you understand. Benthic means if they are living in the bottom or in the sediment, and pelagic means when they are in the water column. So similarly, benthic algae are there. Then there are detritus, a small debris of the organic matters which are coming from the dead organisms. And also we have bacteria. So these are the main food sources. What are the different feeding type? There are deposit feeders. So it means that they feed by surface deposit. I mean, there are feed there on the surface, and they will use their claw or they will use their appendages in order to feed directly into their mouth openings, right? And then we will have this burrowing deposit feeders. Also, we have the suspension feeders or the filter feeders. Okay. Uh, for now, I will explain two types of feeding. One is one is deposit feeder and other one is suspension feeder. So deposit feeders will use their claws or will use their appendages to feed directly into the mouth, and then it will go into the gut, and then it will come out as a fecal matter, right? So this is a process. Now this suspension feeder will absorb the water or will absorb this fluid or solvent, whatever you say, and then it will, I mean, uptake the solvent or fluid or whatever you say, absorb the nutrients, and then remove it outside through the opening. So this is an example of deposit and the suspension feeder.